Welcome to Ortho Insider Season 2. This is the Canadian Orthopedic Association's podcast that goes behind the scenes in orthopedic surgery in Canada, or in this season's case, internationally. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Haddad, who's joining us from the UK. Dr. Haddad is an orthopedic surgeon and the Professor and Chief of Surgery at University College Hospital and University College London. He is the editor-in-chief of Bone and Joint Journal, and he's also the director of the Institute of Sports, Exercise, and Health. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our first question we always ask our guests is, what is your origin story and how did you get into orthopedic surgery in the first place?
I was a very keen athlete. My main sport was rugby.
Nice.
And when I was finishing school, I was really keen to still play rugby. Rugby wasn't a professional sport at the time.
Interesting.
And so medicine was my way of actually continuing to play rugby all the way through my university degree.
Interesting.
Landed in a vocation. By the time I finished med school, I'd learned more about injuries than I'd learned about anything else.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
And I had some wonderful orthopedic mentors early in my career. I qualified from the Middlesex University College Hospital, where I finally ended up many, many years later. But my mentors, the people who kind of helped me early in my career, were orthopedic surgeons, and I could just see that I could kind of marry my passion for sports and musculoskeletal things with my job and actually enjoy what I do.
Amazing.
And the outcomes of our surgery are incredible
Yes.
compared to everything else. If you want to be someone who does things, well, hey, we do things and people get better.
Absolutely, yeah. That seems to be a common theme of people who choose orthopedics, right? The kind of the sport background, but also the desire to help people with immediate effect, which is excellent.
Successes are real successes.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So interesting story is I did my I did my medical school in Ireland, in University College Dublin, and so I was like a modest rugby player, and I tried out for the rugby team at the hospital. Just as you said, it's a huge culture over there. Unfortunately, my first try, I got actually knocked out, and I was like, you know what? I think we'll focus on medicine. So it's cool to hear that surgery for you was almost a side gig or a byproduct of your desire to play rugby, which is really neat.
Yeah, I mean, it was at the time that was the easiest way to, in the culture I came from, it was the easiest way to continue playing with good justification, as opposed to do a decent day's work.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So you talked about some of your orthopedic surgery mentors who kind of helped you along the way. Can you tell us about a little bit about them and the impact they had on you?
Sure. I mean, it was the late Andy Ransford was probably the first person who just loved what he did. He was actually a spine surgeon, but just was one of these great communicators. Loved being at work, was fantastic with his patients, and was intellectually really a very, very super guy. Yeah. And so I started off with Andy Ransford, Andrew Jackson, Mike Edgar, and then moved on to George Bentley, who really was my biggest mentor. He was the professor in London at the time. There was one professor, who kind of ruled the roost, and George Bentley basically guided me into. I was doing core surgical training at the time. So in the UK, you started off, you did core surgical training, and then after that, competitively, you could go into general surgery, you could go to orthopedics and to cardiothoracics, and you recognise the failings of the other specialties and how great orthopedics was. And George kind of shepherded me through my career and got me into orthopedics.
Amazing.
And then actually, my experience in Canada was, I came over to Canada, did a fellowship in Vancouver, and that was Clive Duncan was in his pomp, and what a legend, what a great communicator, superb surgeon. Yeah. And so I spent a phenomenal year in Canada with Clive and Don Garbers. Yeah. Really, that was the icing on the orthopedic cake at the end of my training. I then went to the US before getting back home, but in reality, probably one of the most wonderful years, both personally and professionally, was spent in Vancouver in the late 90s.
Amazing. And just with some of the giants of our field, like genuinely.
The contribution that people like Clive and Don have made in terms of the clearest thinking around periprosthetic infection, around periprosthetic fractures. So that's something we forget. I suspect the young people in the audience here may not even know who Clive Duncan was.
That's right.
And that's really sad.
It is, yes. You said that one of your personal goals is to take clinical and kind of bench research to an internationally renowned level, and you have done a wonderful job at that. Is that something that you were always interested in, or was that kind of guided to you by your mentors going through?
I guess it's a bit of both. At the end of the day, you take your personality and the way you think, the way you process, your energy levels, into anything that you do. And then people shape that and encourage you and open doors for you.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, you have to drive that process.
Mm-hmm.
And collecting evidence, acting on evidence, translating evidence is what I've always sort of aimed and thrived to do. Now, I'm very fortunate. I'm in a centre where I'm surrounded by wonderful engineers, by wonderful geneticists, wonderful scientists. So you suddenly are in a place like UCL where you're the simple person surrounded by lots of very, very clever people, and you can then interact with them, and that gives you all the stepping stones you need to really change things.
Yeah.
So it's been a great opportunity. So learned trial research from great trialists, learned biomechanics from really good engineers, and so you build on all that.
Yes. And tell us a little more about how you create that team. You said surrounding yourself with great people, which is again a common thread. And how have you been able to achieve that?
I think that's part of it is getting lucky. Part of it is being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
I would guess a part of it is the ability to work with people and communicate with people and to kind of recognize that synergy, because if you and I are working together, you bring something to the game, I bring something to the game. And that's why, going back to your initial question, that's why I think sport's really key. When I'm interviewing and appointing people, if somebody has succeeded in sport, they, particularly in a team sport, then they are able to work as part of a bigger picture and able to deliver. Because actually what you can do as a group is much greater than you can do as an individual.
Totally. Yes, greater than some of the parts, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so now, one of your range roles is you're the editor-in-chief of Bone and Joint Journal. For the casual researcher like myself, there's always questions that we kind of want to figure out. So things like, as an editor, what are some things that a researcher can do to better get published, for example?
I mean, I think that there are plenty of things you can do to get published. I mean, I think in reality, there's too much published. So I think you may wish to talk about that.
Yes.
I think if you're going to get published in the major journals,
Yes.
I think the key thing ultimately is methodology.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about asking the right question and addressing that question in a correct, reproducible, transparent way, and trying to answer it. And I think that's the best research. It's patient-centered research that is done in a methodologically sound way. So if you really want to succeed, stop, look at people who are doing good research, learn from them, talk to patients.
Interesting.
Bring collaboration on board so that you're actually working with other people who bring their skill sets. So build your team. You don't necessarily have to fund your team, but build your team so that you've got people who already understand what you're doing. So collaborate, be patient-focused, create good questions, because good questions give good answers. If you don't have a good question at the beginning, you're kind of going to lose yourself a little bit.
Yes.
And I think that's the key to good research. Behind all that, frankly, lots of things will end up getting published, because for every area that we look at, every subspecialty, every little niche, there will be a different best form of data, a different best form of research that will answer that question at that time. So I think the answer isn't as simple as you would like it to be, but if you had to focus on one thing, it is methodology.
No, that's very, very helpful. And I think a lot of people like myself who want to get into research, but we don't have the strong desire as you've had made your career out of it, but are still obviously interested in it. So that's very, very helpful to kind of get through that.
And I think everybody should. It's a real challenge worldwide if you look around, how we get everybody to engage in research in some form or another.
Right.
Some systems demand that you publish, other that you recruit to trial, others that you present. I mean, in reality, I think my challenge for everybody is if you do not understand research, you're going to struggle, because you'll be privileged. You're in Canada, you have wonderful training, you go on a fantastic fellowship, you go into practice, and then 5 years or 10 years later, you have to make some decisions, because the world has moved on.
Absolutely.
The stuff that you learned when you were a resident or fellow, you suddenly realize actually it doesn't work all the time.
Right.
There are problems, and you are faced with all this material. Some of it good, some of it awful.
Yes.
And you're actually going to have to discern. Nobody else is going to do it for you, because they're trying to sell you something. Yeah. So that's where, for me, research comes in. Everybody needs the ability to look at a set of data, look at an output, look at an advert, look at a communication, and say, this is valid, or this is not so valid, or I need more data. And so I think we need to educate everybody in research to a certain degree. Is everybody going to be a career researcher? No, that's a niche area for only some people.
Yes.
But everybody needs to understand research.
And so, what is the best way for us to educate? Because do come from a very lucky system where we are well trained, and not everybody has that fortune. So, what's the best way to go about doing that?
So, I think it frankly should be a critical core part of every residency program, of every fellowship, that is embedded in there. If we accept that it is in some and it isn't in others, then the sort of courses we run, I'm editor-in-chief of the Bone and Joint Journal, we run regular research methods courses, which are basically educating people about what studies you do, how to do them, the basic statistics, just generally trying to understand the literature. I mean, I'm in a very nice position tomorrow afternoon. I've got a session with the residents who are still here at the COA on a Friday afternoon.
That's right.
There may be no one. They may all be enjoying the good weather, but that's the reason I'm here. Quite frankly, I'm here because we're trying to make that available and get people thinking in that way from as early in their career as possible.
That's amazing.
And the goal is not just to create professors in orthopedic surgery. The goal is for the entire community to be able to discern the good, the bad, and the ugly in a rational, clear way.
And become lifelong learners, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's funny. One of my mentors told me when I left my fellowship to go into practice, and he said, if you're doing the same things 5 years from now, I will be sorely disappointed in you. And it's true. It kind of just morphs by itself. Like you said, everything you learn in fellowship doesn't always work, right? So,
and that's very true. So I think everybody needs to take that away, in that what is available, the right thing to do, will evolve throughout your career.
Yeah.
The sting in the tail is changing practice.
Yes.
It involves a tremendous amount of rigor and an understanding. Because actually, if you don't really understand your outcomes, and we all work off emotion rather than data in principle. So, the one complication drives change as opposed to
The
data
end of one.
aggregation. Yeah, absolutely. So you've got to be really careful. And I think practice change is a really interesting thing to study, because you really should have data at the beginning and data at the end to see if your practice change has made a difference, because that's really relevant to you. We all reference the literature. I want you to reference the literature, but what happens in the Mayo Clinic and what happens in Halifax may be two completely different things.
Absolutely.
So I think we've got to be a little bit cautious there.
And so, are there opportunities for that, like either personal databasing or registry databasing?
So I think for each individual as they start their career, and I've had the privilege of running a training program in London. So people come to me at the end of their training and what do I do now? And there's lots of things you do, but one of them is actually have a system for capturing your data. And it's a damn sight easier in 2024 than it was back in the last century when I started in practice, because there are data collection systems now. Either you can, your hospital will have one, there are registries. So I think you've got to get the best data you can practically get in an affordable way. But your operating log will now be available to you. You will know how many you've done of X, Y, or Z. You'll hopefully be able to track your patient outcomes to a certain extent, because that's what's going to guide your practice. And I think the most important thing you do early in your career is make sure you're in a setting where you see enough volume that actually you start to understand your outcomes. If you either don't see your patients, which is something some of the administrators would like to happen, or you don't see enough patients, your capacity to learn and evolve will diminish.
Right.
So I think that's really key. But ultimately, if you really want to succeed, you need data collection systems and data around you, so that you can actually audit what you're doing, understand it, and then evolve on that basis, whilst looking outside, seeing what the rest of the world is telling you. And that can be chatter at these meetings, committee reports, all the way through to the randomized studies, the meta-analyses, and the big data.
You mentioned earlier that there's almost too much data, and they kind of said, there's good data, there's that kind of data, and there's poor data. How does one sift through all that to know what's good?
And that so the easy answer is what we talked about. You have to look at the methodology. And people often don't have time to do that, which, to be honest, is why you have to look to the top few journals, because they've got a track record, they've got tremendous peer review processes, they've got editorial boards that oversee, so that the material that's published there is, I would say, more trustworthy than what is out there in the wider world. That's not to say there isn't some good in the wider world, but there's less good in the wider world. And so ideally you have your own discernment, but beyond that, where something comes from is more trustworthy. And something published, peer-reviewed, is clearly much more valuable than something that is just presented, or that people just make claims that are not necessarily substantiated.
Yes.
So I think that's tricky. So that's kind of the number one. And I think it's a real challenge out there, because you and I will walk out of here, when it's I'll get to walk out of here and go to a session, and I will sit there, and some very bright people will try and support their argument.
Yes.
And by supporting their argument, they will frankly reference anything that's out there that supports their argument. The quality of that material kind of tends to fade slightly into the background. So you've got to be incredibly careful about that. So getting everybody to a level where they can drill in and understand the methodology behind the studies, the ones that come to the surface, would really help from that point of view. The other piece that helps is, if you like, concordance. I'm big on the fact that if the presentations at the meetings, if the case series, the big data, and the RCTs all point in the same direction, that's a pretty strong signal.
Yes.
Then that may be a time for practice change.
Interesting. And so this next question may be answered by what you just said, but in orthopedics specifically, it's hard to get that level 1 double-blind RCT. There's a lot of case reports out there, retrospective studies that are published in the big journals, and so how do we manage that? And again, is it a concordance thing then, or?
Yeah, so it's partly that. So I think I disagree with you that I don't think many case reports are published in the big journals. I think the world has moved on.
Fair,
the
yes.
world's moved on towards more RCTs, more of the better quality observational data sets. There's got to be a really good reason to publish a retrospective observational study. But in some areas, some bits of pediatric orthopedics, that's the best we've got. So we've got to consider for each question what the best answer is. But I think you've got to go for the highest level of evidence you can get in each area.
Yeah.
And in some things it is expert opinion.
Yeah.
But partly we now have far too many outputs, and people are so busy, and the way that they look at the world has changed. So people are reading an abstract, not reading a paper. Frankly, they're reading a Twitter feed, or they're reading an Instagram post. They're reading it. It's really difficult. While those are phenomenal tools for dissemination, there's no substitute for actually reading the real material.
Yes.
But there's a lot of junk science out there, and I think we need to just teach everybody that there is a ton of junk science.
Yeah.
If something is published in, I'm not going to name any names, in the Cascade rag that isn't the real journal, there's a reason why it's there.
Right.
It's not there because it should be fundamentally life-changing and rammed down your throat.
Yes.
It's there because, frankly, somebody business model decided to publish it, rather than because it's good quality material. So 90% of the literature, if you want a number, 90% is wasted.
Interesting.
It's only a small percentage that really adds value.
That's an incredible figure.
Yeah.
90%.
Yeah, and I can't give you science behind that, but that is, if you see the exponential increase in PubMed, and you could publish what you had for breakfast this morning. So be very careful. So I think there's a lot of rubbish out there. There are too many journals.
There's too many journals. That's right.
Open publishing has a massive advantage. Why would we go back to doing our best research and hiding it so nobody can see it?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
So you would want everything to be out there, but the fact that actually now there's a pay-to-publish model, problematic. At the same time, we work with industry. Industry is wonderful. We develop things, but actually industry wants to make claims, so they want stuff published. And people who want promotion, people who want limelight, people will publish material that's at a lower level. So it's really tricky.
Yeah, it's a different landscape for sure, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's a challenge.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you there's a solution.
No, I hear you. Yeah, but on that note, though, you kind of mentioned everyone has much less time than they used to have. What do you think is a good way to kind of keep on top of things? Just have a small snippet, but that maybe you could bookmark for later.
Yeah, no. So I think everyone works online these days, and there are digests that will lead you in that direction. I say track your favorite 4 or 5 journals, because they'll take you to those materials, those things, and most of the big journals now will effectively be able to give you a menu for your subspecialty.
Yes.
So if you are just interested in the left shoulder in under 40s, the website will guide you to shoulder problems in the under 40s that affect the left shoulder.
Yes.
So that the software is now capable of doing that. You'll be able to funnel that through, but then you're still going to have to stop and read it. I think the real difficulty is when people read the headline and don't read the real detail.
Yes, for sure.
And in my ideal world, everybody is able to go underneath when they need to and actually dissect the real detail and say, hey, this really interesting piece of work, but actually, you know what, it's not the final.
If you have a medical trainee or somebody who really wants to get into not just research, but being where you are, you know, reviewing for a journal or even being the editor-in-chief one day, what's the path to that?
That path is relatively straightforward. For us, you attend a reviewer's course, so you get the basics, and then you put your hand up and say, I want to review. And I frankly think everybody should have a go at that. It's a win-win. You learn about the topic, you feed back to the author. It's kind of a useful societal thing, if nothing else. It's a formative thing. It's a good thing to do. Now, some people will love it, and if you enjoy it and you start reviewing, people will see your reviews and give you more. It's really a very simple equation.
Yeah, interesting.
Those who respond on time, send good reviews, get sent more work.
Yeah.
So it's almost a disincentive, but actually it works really. And people grow into, you quickly see how people think, and
yes.
It's a wonderful privilege being an editor.
Yeah.
You actually get to understand how people's brains work a little bit,
yes.
and you see who's phenomenally bright and insightful, and who's actually, frankly, probably a very good orthopedic surgeon, but can't see the wood from the trees. So I think that's really fascinating. So, and people grow into those roles, and then, I have an editorial board that's a really active editorial board. It's people come and meet in person. We have discussions, we set strategy, we discuss the difficult papers, and those people are selected based on their intellect, their knowledge, and frankly, their contributions.
Amazing.
You look at their reviews, they're amazing reviews, and think, wow, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful, and that's the way to grow. So if somebody wants to do that, I started by being super excited to get those big envelopes that arrived, because it was before the IT world.
That's right.
You get that envelope and you go through the paper, and you feel blessed that somebody actually thinks your opinion matters.
Yeah.
You feel bad, and then people ask you to do more, and you then get invited onto an editorial board, and then you contribute more, and eventually somebody stupid enough says, God, we'll interview you and we'll make you editor-in-chief. They probably regretted that decision.
No, they definitely got that one right. You're obviously very passionate about research in orthopedics in general, so we're very lucky to have you do what you do. So before we finish off, though, we always ask, is there anything you'd like to share with us in terms of your professional life or your personally that you're trying to get out there for everyone to know about?
I don't know about getting out there. I just think we should all feel incredibly privileged to be in a wonderful specialty where, frankly, you can do great clinical work, where we are innovative like no other specialty, where our world keeps changing and evolving, and where we have actually the capacity to educate and teach, we have the capacity to research. So I've had a phenomenal journey. I get the privilege of coming to Halifax and seeing your city and learning more about Canada, but actually we are in a wonderful profession. So I think people should look beyond their day-to-day work and just try and do a little bit more.
And last question I have to ask, you brought it up now. In your roles or otherwise, what do you think is the next major technical advancement that's going to come down the pipeline for orthopedics?
I think the big thing in orthopedics is personalization. I think we've done a lot of things, done them well, but actually we've done them without knowing the target for each individual patient. And what computing, AI, machine learning, that whole big black box that everyone worries about will do is actually enhance our ability to define your phenotype, your needs, and then be able to deliver something, whether it's cell-based, whether it's scaffold-based, whether it's an arthroplasty, that will work for you. So I think we're going from a mass production to more personalization. Whether it's affordable, where it's affordable, is a different issue. But I think that's kind of the exciting piece.
Yes.
And we may along the way pick up a cure for osteoarthritis and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's the exciting bit at the moment, is integrating those technologies that are happening around us. I think, the really, finish off with this actually, when I come to a meeting and I look around, I think the really clever people are the ones who don't just look in their own area, they look outside their area, not just in orthopedics, but across other fields, across other sciences. Those are the people who will move the needle.
Absolutely, and that's that whole idea of being a little bit well-rounded, having interest in other fields, whatever that may be, and that cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can always learn from everybody.
Absolutely. No, I love that. No, thank you so much for being here. If people want to reach out to you, is there some kind of official email or something they can?
Absolutely. I mean, there are not many Faris Haddads out there. I'm really easy, I'm easy to find, easy to hate.
No.
And anybody who wants to find me can find me quite easily via the journal or frankly,
Perfect.
directly. It's very easy to do.
Thank you again for your time. We really appreciate you being out here and joining us for the COA.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Cool.
That was awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.